Now I'd like to look at the first and last of William's monastic virtues. The first being self-discipline, and the last being the wisdom of burdens lifted. The wisdom of burdens lifted in greater detail. Now remember, in the introductory video, we saw that William wanted to integrate teleological psychology and human affection into monastic practice, and that we saw that teleological psychology turns not only on seeing that we are made in God's image, but also living into the divine likeness. And as William puts it, and I think it's worth repeating this quote, from the wholesome purpose set out at the beginning, all the way to the end of the journey, wisdom solidly supports the courage of those moving upward, guarding them lest they fall, shrewdly arranging everything in good times and bad, and transforming and rearranging their circumstances so that they might return to their beginning and disappear into the hidden face of God. That's section 45 of the text. Thus, in William's mind, there are moments or chapters in monastic life, and really in all of our lives, that culminate in a sense of burdens being lifted. And this is how William puts it in section 44. This is my translation. In this present life, religious observances are effective for perceiving the presence of God. Since we can scarcely grasp anything besides bodies and bodily things, and we are bound to these observances lest we drift away from God. This is why the word religion is derived from the Latin word religare, to bind. But when a faithful soul has been taught by such things, we begin not to depend on them and pass from physical to spiritual things, and from spiritual things to the maker of them both. We lay down all our baggage and forget everything besides God. Now, if you'll indulge me, I think a personal anecdote might help draw out what William has in mind here. In January of this year, 2020, I was able to visit the cluster of Coptic Orthodox monasteries at Wadi al-Natrun in Lower Egypt. At one of these monasteries, Dar al-Makariyu, I met Father Mercurius, who happens to be a former engineer. And I got to chat with him for a while over a cup of mint tea. One of the things that I learned is that in Egypt, monastics have a lot more autonomy than in what they refer to as the Latin Church, that is, Roman Catholics, us Episcopalians, and so on, the Reformed tradition. And for example, senior monks at Dar al-Makariyu, the monastery of St. Macarius, spend most of their time in their cells and are only expected to show up for the main daily meal and Sunday Mass. And here's a Coptic rosary. I picked it up in Old Cairo and brought it with me to St. Macarius' monastery, and I asked Father Mercurius, how do I use it? And he gave me this wonderful, oh, you poor Latin smile. And he said, well, there's no one way. People use them as it seems best to them. Father Mercurius' point is exactly the same as William's. There's a time to set down baggage. Finally, here's a couple of photos of my armed escort, the escort I had driving out of Wadi al-Natrun. There were two high-ranking tourist policemen. One of them had 4 stars on his shoulder, and 5 regular army guys. My guide told me, in my country, you have the right to go wherever you want. But word will get around that you were at the monasteries, and you're a high-value target. So my hearing about setting down burdens, and that there's no one right way to use a Coptic rosary, came at the cost of putting my guide, driver, and the security men. 9 other human beings at risk. 9 months later, that's still sinking in. But let's turn to an area where Benedict and William are in more agreement, and that is the role of obedience at the beginning of the spiritual journey. As Benedict says, the first step of humility is for a man to have always the fear of God before his eyes and never forget it. William agrees that there are some personalities who will only do what's expected of them out of fear of punishment. And we all know the type. The paroled petty criminal, the small-town Chamber of Commerce guy who gripes about his taxes but eventually coughs up because he's afraid of being audited. But in the monastery, says William in paragraph 5, youthful vigor will move a novice from a spirit of fear of punishment toward tasting grace and beginning to love. And he uses the word amare, to love. Beginning to love God, and in this moment, one shouldn't waste the natural enthusiasm of youth. There is a place and a time to be, and this is how William puts it, to be drunk on God. And he even quotes Virgil, insanire libet, and some people translate that as, it is pleasant to be insane. Later, of course, this natural emotional affection for God will mature into adult Christian charity, caritas. But meanwhile, pious amour is something to be encouraged in the novices. And so, if the novitiate is the time and place to be drunk on God, what is the role of the abbot and the novice master? Designated driver, ground control. Monastic obedience is going to be, says William, the thing that makes youthful intoxication with God a salutary and productive experience. Monastic obedience isn't about grinding people down. It's about making space, creating the venue for your mind to be blown, for your mind to be expanded through an encounter with God. To summarize, in De Natura et Dignitate Amoris, William of St. Thierry presents us with a picture of grace building on nature. Early in the day, you're drunk on God, and monastic obedience and religious observances are there to channel natural affection and desire, amor, toward mature Christian charity, caritas or agape. But as one advances in charity, there comes a time to lay down the burdens of observance and compliance. We don't have to go back and get second and third high school diplomas. We don't have to keep spinning the old KISS records and pretend that they're still interesting. Similarly, there's no margin in spiritual nostalgia. And I want you to think instead of the first line of Robert Browning's poem, Rabbi Ben Ezra. It goes like this: grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. Going forward, I'm going to be looking at 2 more topics. First, having talked about how William's monastic virtues pair with Benedict's degrees of humility, I want to revisit these virtues, that is, William's virtues, from the perspective of William's account of stages of life. And secondly, there's a disagreement between William and, in the next generation, Thomas Aquinas, regarding the stability of states of grace. And I'm going to try to sort out that question in terms of the Aristotelian distinction between potentiality and actuality. So stay tuned.